The Immortal Mask, a 1970s superhero crime noir adventure, follows a retired soldier turned reporter who is given a coveted interview with a death row inmate. What he learns thrusts him into Atlanta's shadowy underworld. He'll have to use his military training to survive being hunted for possessing the information that could topple the city's most powerful ruling class. This is not a pre-order or a crowdfunding campaign. Get your books now at denali's.com.
Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content.
25 seconds to curtain, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, author and cartoonist Stephan Pastis. This is a fun one for me because I always enjoy the opportunity. I talk with lots of people who are creating comics and comic strips and comic books, but every once in a while you get to talk to somebody that you've read for years. And I got introduced to you and your work shortly after I had an interview with Scott Adams. And he was like, hey, everybody should be reading Pearls Before Swine. Like, yeah. Okay, I'll go do that. And there it was. And I was so tempted to open the show with, hello, Ziba Neba, because they're my favorite. Trying to translate the alligators is always fun. So, yeah. So how long has it been now that you've been doing the Pearls Before Swine?
Thank you. 22 years this December, so it's been a super long time. Isn't that crazy?
It doesn't feel that long.
I know. It's wild. I was a lawyer for 10 years, and then the strip took off, and I quit the law job, and I've been doing the strip for 22 years.
So
wild.
It's still fresh. Every time I read it now, it's a little bit more, I think, a little bit more topical these days than it was then, because there's so much that deserves it.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, you have to get traction now, whether you want to or not, on social media. Like, that is where most of the audience is going. So if it's not something that somebody can post and kind of say, hey, this is relevant to my life, or I think this is relevant to you, or this is me, then it really doesn't get traction. The weird stuff doesn't get as much traction. I think it's influenced the strip. I think it's different from those early days, and I would blame or credit social media for that.
Yeah, I read a book series, I want to say about 10 years ago. It was probably longer than that. Scott Westerfeld's Uglies was the series. It was a really good series. but he was sort of a precursor to social media in his
Yeah.
science fiction book, and everybody was online, and they had this thing called the wisdom of the crowd, whereas like you threw the thing out there, and then the crowd came back with the answer.
Yeah.
And I think in real life we've proven it's more the idiocy of the crowd,
Yeah.
because none of us is as dumb as all of us.
It's probably true, huh? Yeah, I like that.
So what was the what was the reason for the characters that you chose in Pearls Before Swine? I mean, you
Well,
got
with the
farm
rat,
animals, kind of.
yeah, with the rat and the pig, I wanted two animals that sort of were looked down upon or despised. Like I like the notion of a rat. People always say like "you dirty rat" or whatever, "you filthy rat," and a pig. They use the pig the same way. And so I like two sort of down and out characters that had no glamour to them or panache. That sort of appealed to me. The crocodiles were this late night experiment. Like I just literally had the idea in the middle of the night and wrote it down on a piece of paper by the side of the bed. Goat was simply practical. I needed a could be the straight guy.
You're freezing.
So, and then zebra was the food for the cows. Yeah, and then everybody else sort of came along because they appeared once, and either I liked them or people seemed to like them, so I kept them. Like there's a guard duck and wise ass. It's rare that a character I think is going to be a good character. Like if I set out to do a character, it's rare that that becomes a hit. What's more common is I do a strip, it has an animal, people like it, I keep doing it. Like you sort of stumble upon additional characters now in year 22 of the strip.
When you had the thought for the crocodiles, did their dialect come with that, or did that sort of
Yeah,
evolve?
totally. Yeah, it came from I think the inspiration was a Saturday Night Live skit that had I think it was Tarzan and maybe Tonto and Frankenstein, and they all spoke in broken English. And me want food or whatever, and I like that, so I gave that to the Crocs. People always ask me what that accent was, but it really was nothing more than the broken syntax of Tarzan. So, yeah.
It's fun to translate, and like I said, you just say it out loud, and you just
Thank you.
have fun with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
One of the recurring characters in the strips is Stephan Pastis. You show up
I
yourself.
know. It's true. It's funny because sometimes at these book signings I'm going to be doing in October, inevitably someone will say, "What character do you relate to the most?" And I always just say off the top of my head, "Rat," because it is. But I forget that I actually am a character, but I never name that character as the one I relate to. It's Rat that I relate to.
And usually it's Rat coming into your office to tell you how awful the strip was or how terrible the pun was.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
it is.
that kind of fourth wall breaking.
Yeah, it's what it does. If Rad criticizes me in the last panel, it lets me get away with a really dumb joke. I think that would be referred to as postmodern. Like in other words, if you end on the joke, it's sort of like the old Jack Benny days where you go, "Take my wife, please," and then dum. Like it feels old when you go out on the joke. So if you go out on a panel where I'm commenting on the humor and specifically how bad it is, then it allows me to get away with this really stupid pun or whatever. Because it's my way of saying, yeah, I know it's stupid too, and I'm doing it anyways because it amuses me. So that once I figured that out, that opened up a whole big wide avenue, I think.
Yeah. I see a lot of Ignats in Rat. Not just, similar, not just because they're both rats. But,
Yeah.
I can see Rat chucking a brick just as easily as I could Ignats.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he does on occasion.
Yeah, that it didn't have an influence on me at the time, but once I got more into Peanuts and I realized that Crazy Cat was the biggest influence on Schultz, then it made me do a deeper dive into Crazy Cat. And Crazy Cat, I would say Peanuts is the best strip, arguably with Calvin, of the last 50 years of the 20th century. And I would say that Crazy Cat was far and away the best strip of the first half. He was so far ahead of his time. And just that dynamic of the cat who loves the Ignatz, and Ignatz just wants to hit him with the brick, and then the cop has to, who does love the cat, but the cat doesn't love the dog. It's like this crazy triangle. It's so perfectly done. Yeah, I love it. In fact, I went to Monument Valley, Arizona recently, and in part it was because that, as people who know Crazy Cat know, that was the setting for Crazy Cat.
Folks, we're getting a little bit of lag on the audio here, so be patient. It's not enough
Okay.
to where it's like we can't understand what's going on, but I'm going to pause now
Yeah,
and then just to let audio come through.
I'll do it.
You mentioned Calvin and Hobbes, and it reminded me that when I was looking for graphics to cobble together and make the thumbnail for tonight's show, one
Yeah.
of the pictures I found of you, self-portrait, was the strip where you're in a bar and you're like, "I'm a cartoonist. Anything I know." Have you ever heard of Calvin and Hobbes? You didn't say you drew it,
Yeah.
but like, and you know
You know, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because I was just putting together the presentation for the tour. That I always do this PowerPoint at all the stops, and I use that strip because I had this interaction with Bill Watterson, and that was the strip I used to introduce myself. And he had a really good sense of humor about it, and that led to him drawing pearls for a week back in June of, I think it was 2014, and that was a huge highlight of my career. It's pretty cool.
very nice. The strip ended with a panel. It was kind of adult. Did you get any? Do you ever get kickback on strips? Not just that one, but any of the others.
Oh my God. The whole PowerPoint show is framed around the complaints I've gotten, from the absurd to the well-deserved. And then I also show my responses because, unlike most cartoonists, I think, when I get a complaint, if it's really angry, I try to egg them on. I try to get a second one because I know what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to show those at these PowerPoint things. So I get giddy when someone goes loopy. So yeah, it's sort of a perverse incentive. So, but yeah, I throw them into the show, and yeah, it's pretty fun.
So if you want to get Stephan working on all cylinders, folks, complain about his cartoons.
And I should mention too, if you want to see the tour dates, I don't know if you're going to do it or not, but if you just look me up on any social media, just my name, Stephan Pastis, on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, I recently posted all of the tour dates. You will see them there. It's a big tour. I go to 19 cities.
Yeah, and you're going to be in St. Louis, so I'm going to have to take the trip up there, and that's the closest you're going to be here.
Oh, you got to do it.
Little Rock a couple years ago.
That would be
I've got to do it. Why not?
really cool. Yeah, that would be cool. Thank you.
Especially since I've got this little gem in my hands. Um,
Oh, you got the book. Very cool.
I do have the book, and I have not only got the book, I have read the book, and I've read it all the way
No way.
through. So,
No way.
and
Kudos to you.
yeah, it's not War and Peace. It didn't keep me up all night every week, but it's like,
It's a quick read. Yeah.
but it was still, I haven't finished a book in a long time, and this one I did.
Oh, well, that's good. High praise already.
So, well, more is coming because now I've got you and Jimmy Gownley. I don't know if you're familiar with Jimmy Gownley of Amelia Rules.
Oh yeah.
Well, you're both now on the same level of I'm going to punch you, because you have this cute little girl protagonist of your stories, and it's like hilarious, hijinks, hilarious. Why'd you do that? Don't do that.
Yeah.
Dusty in here.
Yeah. That's the
and,
first time. It's crazy. So when I did this kids book series called Timmy Failure, and when the series was over, it was 8 volumes. Disney bought it, and they wanted to turn it into a movie. So I co-wrote it with the director of the movie Spotlight, and it was great. And I got to be there every day at the filming. But one thing I realized from having now done and filmed the movie is movies need big stakes. And Timmy was written as a book. So when I wrote Looking Up, I sort of had that in mind because I'd love to turn it into a movie. And I'm going to try. So it just needed sort of a Sixth Sense twist. And I had never done that in a book before. And without giving anything away, all of the reviewers who have read it and the people that I know who have read it, nobody saw coming what ended up happening in the book. So I think I disguised
and,
it.
and we didn't, we couldn't see it coming. And I'm going to be very cagey, but
Yeah.
I've read books with unreliable narrators before,
Yeah.
and that's a difficult trick to pull off.
Yeah.
But this time we have an unreliable narrator who's giving us unreliable illustrations. So
Yeah.
we're seeing what we believe is, you know,
Yeah.
at the times when it's not there, is there.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I never, again, this is, I can't, I'll just say the thing that, happens, that little idea that made you go, whoa, and relook at the book. That was the genesis for the book. I thought, wow, I wonder if I could pull that off. And it was that idea of that relationship with that little boy that made me think, oh, I got to try this. So, yeah, I'm proud of it. I think that's weird for an author to say, but I really like this book. I think it's one of the more meaningful ones that I've done, but we'll see. It'll be up to the reader to determine, but I liked it.
I've got to reread it now with foreknowledge and see if it still holds up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like watching The Usual Suspects for the second time. It's like,
I was going to say Sixth Sense, but Usual Suspects works too. You're right. Yeah.
so, and I do get a hint about it when she tells her mother, "Do you swear on the piñata's head?" I'm like, the piñata? And that's only in hindsight that I see that.
There are clues.
Why is he talking about piñatas?
Subtles. Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, people are asking, why is he talking about piñatas? It's because Saint, the little girl protagonist here, who's got her turtle, Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes, who's neither president nor doctor, she is a rescuer of everything with a face, including piñatas. If she's at a birthday party and there's a piñata, she will rescue it and run it home before.
Yeah, she steals it. She rescues it. She kidnaps it and she takes it home so that it won't be beaten up by the other kids. I like that metaphor. I like, because Saint is fragile too, and I like the idea of her forming this kinship with the piñatas. That was sort of an idea that appealed to me. And I should also say too, I said this with all the Timmy books. I don't know if anyone believes me, but the book is ostensibly for kids 8 to 12. It says that on the back cover. But I really don't write for kids. I write for myself, and I'm 55. So it just so happens that when I do that, it does appeal to kids. I think if you write to kids, then it almost makes you write down to kids, which any kid can pick up immediately. So I don't do that. I write for me, and kids generally seem to like it. So I guess I'm saying that because if you're an adult and you would hesitate to get a book like this, I think this is for adults too.
It definitely is. I comment on this all the time in the streams we do about the comic books and the comic book industry, and specifically when they write towards kids and they write towards adults. It's like when I was a kid, there could be a Jonah Hex comic book, and it would be a true Western cowboy story. My 40-year-old father would read it, throw it on the coffee table, and his 10-year-old son would pick it up and read it, and nobody thought anything about it. And now it's like, Tiny Toon stuff is for kids, and the stuff that's written for adults is really written for adults.
Yeah, right. You know what? Also, I think I was influenced by Schultz with Peanuts because, I know I was across the board with the comic, but I was also influenced in the sense I was 7 when I picked it up, and I didn't know what the word grief or theology or any of those, philosophy, Beethoven. I didn't know any of that. And either contextually, I would try to pick it up because I wanted to understand it. So I would look at the strip harder, or I would go to a dictionary. So Peanuts ended up teaching me, a lot of words. I think that's the great stealth part about how many of us learned about opera from Bugs Bunny? Probably all of us.
All classical music. I still don't even know what the real words are to Carmen because, I'm singing the Bugs Bunny version all the time.
Yeah, completely.
Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit.
Yeah.
the characters that you populate this story with, and it's like, and the plot of the story, I guess I should at least give some sort of a synopsis, is Saint is change averse, and she's seeing her neighborhood change all around her. Houses are being sold. Old places are being knocked down, new places are coming up, and for what was she, 7, 8?
Yeah, somewhere in there. I never say, but somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, for for
Yeah,
for
the
for a
whole neighborhood.
Peanuts age kid, it's traumatic.
Yeah, the whole neighborhood's changing, and the event that sort of triggers all this is she has this toy store that she goes to every day that is so meaningful to her, and it gets torn down to make room for cafes and all the modern stuff that goes sort of into hipster redeveloped neighborhoods, and the toy store is the last straw for her. So she's gonna fight back, and she's sort of like a Don Quixote figure. It's probably a feudal struggle. She's just a little kid. She's trying to stop all the developers in her city. But I like that kind of story.
Yeah, and I don't know who she's confronted in the book about this, uh, for reasons of plot, but I do know
Wait, say
that
that one more time.
I don't know who she's truly confronted in the book and I can't say why because of reasons of plot. Because there are
Yeah,
scenes where she confronts potential house buyers,
yeah.
and I'm like,
I know what you're
were they
trying to
really
say.
potential house buyers?
I know, I know. There is a way to know, but if I say it, then I'll give away what the whole thing is. But yes, I know what you're talking about. It
Now, when
almost
she
makes
tries
you
to bribe the
reread
real
it.
estate agent, I think that was funny.
Yeah,
He's
it
like,
almost makes you have to reread it to figure that out.
but
Yeah.
Mrs. Grimaldi, I'm sure that she's real, and this is her dressed as Cheese and dressing up Saint as a scary death character, which Saint's going to revamp that costume as the
Yeah,
story
the
goes along.
costumes and all that stuff, and the skull and the crew that woman is in, spelled Krewe. That's all straight out of New Orleans. I go to New Orleans at least once a year. It's probably my favorite city. So Saint lives in a shotgun house. The boy across the street lives in a shotgun. The woman probably lives in the Garden District. So uh, yeah, I just love New Orleans, and I love it as a setting. And were we to ever turn this into a film, that would be fun to film there. Timmy was supposed to be filmed there, but at the last minute we had to change, and we ended up filming in Portland, Oregon, which is still great. But New Orleans would have been fun.
Yeah, the boy across the street, by the way, his name is Chance. Part of his name is Chance, and he's a cartoonist.
Yeah.
So again, is there how much of Stephan is in Chance?
Yeah, there's a lot because when he draws, there's a moment where he shows her everything he's drawn, and if you really look at if you look at that, I think you'll see the rat version of my rat, pig, Ellie elephant.
And
Oh,
I
me,
believe we
I'm in
yeah.
there. Total, the polar bear is in the crease in the middle of the page. He's from Timmy Failure. So yeah, that was pretty autobiographical. Those were a lot of my characters.
And folks, but if you're thinking, cartoon book, there's like almost a drawing on every page or every other page.
Yeah,
This isn't Dogman. This is
no,
not there's anything wrong with Dogman, but this is
yeah,
true textbook narrative all throughout. It just happens to be peppered with it's more Wimpy Kid, I think, than
that's what
Dogman.
I was just gonna say that the technical name for it, the big long name is middle grade illustrated novel, but I call it a Wimpy Kid type book. Timmy Failure that it was the same, and Saint is the same. So yeah, I would call it a Wimpy Kid style book, part drawings, part text.
It's definitely it's going to be a book that sticks with you after you've read it, because when it gets its claws into your heart, it's going to leave a mark.
Well,
But
thank you. That's a compliment. I appreciate it.
well, and one of the things that I enjoyed about Saint and her life is that she's living the kind of childhood that I had 40 some odd years ago,
Yeah,
which was free range.
yeah,
Because she's just going places, and she's coming home and nobody's home, and she just does her thing, and she's like, she sits on the roof,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
thinking,
I did all
what
those
child would
things.
sit on the roof now?
That's a funny part about, when you write, this stuff comes out and you're like, oh, it's obviously my childhood. There's not a lot of technology. Kids now are rarely alone. She doesn't have a helicopter parent. She has the opposite. She has a parent that's, not present. I used to climb up on the roof and sit on the ridge, and I could see everything. And of course, if your mom is home, that's not going to happen. So I could only do it because she wasn't home. So yeah, it's funny you say that, because in my head, it's probably always my childhood, and I give it away. I indicate it in more ways than I would think. But when you list them, I'm like, oh yeah, that's because I grew up in the 70s.
And and while she's sitting on the roof and you're like, yeah, that's a typical kid thing to do, you throw it back into cartoon absurdity, because on the house behind her, the old lady is sitting on her roof in a lawn chair. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
And dropping
So
baby bells
bizarre.
off the side because they roll.
Yeah, my son Thomas would eat those baby bells nonstop. I think that's why they were in my head. But yeah, and I needed them to be up on the roof for the stars, which the stars play a big role um, in the book. So
That's why they're on the cover, even though they play the role in the climax.
yeah, it all came from something I learned years ago, and from astrophysics, which is sort of mind blowing. Which is, if you could somehow, if someone had a telescope powerful enough, many galaxies away, many millions of light years away, if they could see Earth right now at this present moment, they could be seeing dinosaurs in real time, because it takes that long for the light from here to get there. So every time you look up and you see the stars, you're actually looking at the past. That light you're seeing is from way long ago. And I like that idea, so I
It's always
used it in the
present.
book. Yeah, yeah. Past,
And
always
that's the
present.
reason
Yes. Yeah.
that's the reason why I can't watch Brandon Routh in Superman Returns, because I
Yeah.
know this fact. And it's like he takes off for Krypton because a telescope saw that it was still there. I'm like, well, yeah, from
That's
150 million years ago, it was still there.
that's exactly
You're
right.
dumb enough to go.
That's really funny. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's crazy, huh?
So, so what's obviously the tour is going to be occupying your time for the next month. But do you have other book ideas that you want to visit
Yeah.
out
I'd like to do one more book with Saint. I have sort of a follow-up that's a bit of an Alice in Wonderland book. Um, I may or may not. This book can stand alone, I think, without being part of a series. But the thing that I've already written, it's about 400 pages long, is a travel book, but not informative, more like a Bill Bryson or David Sedaris. Like, it's just a book of essays of all the stuff I've experienced, because I go all over the place. And I sort of seek out the strange and the odd and the the stuff most people don't go see. And
there?
then
You only spent 2 days in Eureka Springs?
I know I was, hey, I searched in the mud for diamonds there in Arkansas. There's that
Okay,
field
yeah, I
down
know.
near Hope over there.
Yes.
And I had to see all the Clinton stuff, and I spent 3 days in Little Rock, and yeah, I loved it. I loved Hot Springs too, by the way. But yes, so I do stuff like that, and I go and I write about what happens. And so that's sort of the transition I think I'd like to make to writing books specifically for adults, along the lines of a David Sedaris book. So I think that's my next challenge.
So with the strip, writing a comic strip, what's your time management? What's your pacing to because it's like there's got to be one every day. So is
Yeah.
it like you draw one a day and then you're done? You draw one the next day, or do you draw like 50 of them and then like I'm taking the month off?
Yeah, so I have like a comic strip week and a non-comic strip week. I can't mix them very well. So what I do is, if it's a comic strip week, if it's generally a Monday or a Tuesday, I do 3 dailies. That means a Monday through Saturday strip. On Monday, 3 dailies on Tuesday, a Sunday and a daily on Wednesday, Sunday and a daily on Thursday, and then 3 dailies and 4 more dailies. So that's 14 strips in a week, which is means working Monday through Saturday. But the advantage of it, and the reason why I do it, is if I can produce 14 strips in a week, I only have to do 7. If I do 14, that frees up 26 weeks a year. And I use those weeks to do these other books, to do the book tours, to travel, any other project that I'm doing, like the movie I did. So that's how I do it. So I can only succeed if I'm buying myself weeks every week. So if it's strip week, I got to do 14. That's how I do it.
Sure. And it's not just the act of the drawing and the time that takes, but you got to think something to say.
Yeah, that there's when you start out in this field, you'll have a day where you don't have any strips for the first 2 hours, and you'll be like, "Well, I got to come up with something." So you just power through. Before you know it, 8 hours are gone. But speaking just for myself, I have learned that if I don't have anything after 2 hours, and I just do any of these other projects. If I'm really stuck, I'm not going to keep sitting there. So the other thing, I put time pressure on myself. I either write at a cafe because you can't sit there forever. So there's sort of a subtle clock in the back of your head. Or I go for this loop near my studio. It's this 3-mile walk because I know I'll walk it in about 45 minutes. But at the end of 45 minutes, I have to have a strip or 2 or 3. So it's just that subtle time pressure. As opposed to sitting in a room saying, I'm going to write all day, your brain knows you got 10 hours if you want it. So you have to sort of trick yourself and put a time pressure on it. That's what I have found. And then you could be hyper efficient. And that works much better, at least for me.
Yeah, usually last minute panic is what fuels my creative writing, because it's like it was due yesterday now. So
I think that's most people. Darby Conley, who did Get Fuzzy, Bill Amon, who does Foxtrot. They're almost all last minute guys. Bill Breathitt, who did Bloom County, he was the all-time record holder. He famously would not have his strips done, and he'd get fined by the syndicate. And the fines were so large that he ended up getting like a first-class ticket to Washington, D.C. every week where this would happen, and he would draw on the plane. It was cheaper to pay for the first-class flight, draw the strips on the plane, physically hand them into the syndicate in D.C. than it was to pay the fines. Whether that's true or not, he says it's true, but even if it's not, who cares? It's a great story. But he does say that's how he did it.
That is a great story. I mean, that's he was his own FedEx.
He was his own FedEx. Yeah, I think the reason they fine you is it changes their delivery method, the syndicate's delivery method to the newspapers. I think it required them to FedEx the strips individually. So Breathitt was in what, like 1,000 newspapers. So that's $10 a newspaper they have to pay, and they pass that on to you. So yeah, that's why it was cheaper for him to fly them into DC. Because this is pre-internet. You always had to physically get your strips to the syndicate. Sparky, Charles Schultz, everybody called him Sparky, but Sparky mailed those strips every week. And they were huge dailies, and he would mail them into the syndicate in New York City. In fact, that's how you know if you have an original Peanuts. They're 20-something inches long, and they didn't fit in an envelope. So Sparky's assistant, they would fold them in half. So if you ever see a strip that they say is an original Peanuts, and you don't see that crease down the middle, it's not an original Peanuts, because that's how he turned them in. He folded them and turned them in. They're now worth $50,000.
I would love to get my hands on
crease or no crease.
Yeah, well, that's Marvel Comics used to fold their comics when they had subscriptions out, and that's why you'll see in the price guide subscription crease, which is a grading mechanism, because it means if there's a crease down the middle here, it's because they literally folded it in half to put it in the envelope to put it in the mail because you had a subscription.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that. That's cool. Huh. Yeah, I like that.
Mike Walters is in the chat liking the Looney Tunes background. Thank you, Mike. I picked that because we're kind of talking cartoons. Dr. Crow's Carnival Comic says, you're the guy who came up with Pearls Before Swine. I hated that strip when I was single digits old and stupid. And I love them now that I'm older and have a brain. So,
well, thank you. Is the echoey, can they still hear me? I hope so.
They can hear you. Nothing's getting cut out, but it will go on a delay. So it's like your mouth will move and then the words will come later, but then they catch up.
Okay.
So we're not losing any words. People just have to.
Had my desktop knocked out. Yeah. Yeah.
Darn buffering. So do you do event kind of stories? I'm sure you have hey, these 3 strips go together, but it's.
Yeah, I used to do them.
What was the longest event you have?
Oh, there was a dreadful one. So bad. I think of this. I remember the Get Fuzzy guy. think he's right. Darby's strip is right behind me. He saw this series of strips and he goes, "Dude, you cannot do that." It was pig falling in love with a female pig who he met her at a slaughterhouse, so she didn't
Nikita.
have long to live.
Oh,
It was so dark, and it just went on for days and days and days. So, I really don't do stories as much anymore. The reason why is because I think they can really be a crutch. Because I could just, if I wanted to, I could just keep going with the story and just do twists and turns, and um, it's almost too easy. You're not really doing a joke. I mean, you can do a joke too, but I'm suspicious of myself when I do it because it's such a crutch. And also, when you do it, you're going to waste two strips no matter what. You're probably going to waste the open one and the closed one, because at the open, you got to explain what's going on. And at the close, you got to wind things up. So those are probably not going to be great strips. So that's why I don't do them anymore. I still do them occasionally. I have a series that I just drew where Rat goes to confession every day, and it doesn't go well. So yeah, I do it. I just don't do it as much.
Pops, glad you dropped by to visit and listen to our chat with Stephan Pastis, who, by the way, is not just a cartoonist but also author. And I haven't mentioned it, but folks, the link to Amazon to get this book, and yes, it's a Critical Blast affiliate link, so you help the channel out using it. He still gets all the nickels.
Yeah, and also wherever you are it's only in the U.S. Unfortunately, I tried to get Canada on this one, but I couldn't. But wherever you are in the U.S., odds are I'm probably coming to a town fairly close to you. I'm going to 19 cities in October, and if you want to see all the cities, just search Stephan Pastis on social media. I've been posting all of the stuff. I think just on Instagram today, I put all the tour dates. So yeah.
Yeah, and I've got the list in the email here. I won't share my screen on my email because God knows what else would pop up. But
I mean, I can
starting October 9th,
yeah. Go ahead.
you'll be in Danville, California. You'll be in Brooklyn, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan, Akron, Ohio, Tacoma Park, Maryland, Winter Park, Florida. But they don't really make a nice little line, do they? You just popping all over the place.
They do towards the end.
Okay.
Orlando,
Winter Park, Florida.
Atlanta, yeah.
Yeah.
St.
Maybe in
Louis.
St. Louis,
Yeah.
Memphis. Oh,
New
New Orleans. There you go.
Houston.
Denver, Tempe, San Diego. I'm reading them down here in order from the email that I got. And Roseville, California. Again, Beaverton, Oregon, and Lake Forest Park, Washington. So if you are listening from anywhere near those places, definitely look him up on social media, find out your times and dates, and you got plenty of time to get this book off of Amazon so that you have something to take and sign. But don't buy it at the store, because that's why the store is doing it, because they want to sell books, not so that you can walk in and meet some guy and have him sign it and then walk out.
Yeah.
So
and I also
saved
draw
that
in all of the books. Yeah, whether it's a Pearls book they buy or looking up, I always draw a character in all of them. I think most people probably just sign, but my signature is pretty. It's not legible. so I started a thing years ago where I draw Rat a pig in all the books.
So I've watched a lot of comic book artists draw, and I've seen the John Burns How to Draw Superheroes, and it's always like eggs and ovals and blue lines and this and that.
Yeah.
And then several years back in St. Louis, I met Tom Batchick to talk about the complete Funky Winkerbean books he was doing.
Yeah.
And after the interview, I had 3 of them there, and I just said, would you mind signing them? And he not only signed them, but he started drawing a head sketch, and he's one with a Sharpie.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, dude, don't you like sketch it? He's like, nope, I just do it. So have they become as automatic to you to where you're just like, give me an ink pen?
I do the exact same thing. I just take a Sharpie and I draw the characters in the book. I can almost do Rat with my eyes closed. Sometimes I'll misplace the eyes, but I can definitely do the snout, the ears, and the body in just a matter of seconds. It's pretty fun to try. Yeah, you just get, I've done it, I don't know, 50,000 times. So you practice makes perfect. The one I'm going to struggle with is drawing Saint when I sign the looking up books because it was 2 years ago that I wrote it. So I'm going to have to practice a few times and remember how to draw
Yeah.
the character. The interesting thing is if I draw in a book, like I said, I don't pencil, but I always draw the character facing to the left.
Okay.
If I have to draw a character facing, I can't freehand going to the right. I can only I can only freehand if they're facing to the left. It's a bizarre quirk, but there you go.
Dr. Crow says at your age it needs a globe.
I
Start with a
know.
circle, then some lines, and all the details. That'll be 30 bucks.
Listen, if anybody wants to invite me to a book festival in another country, as long as I haven't been there before, and even if I have been there before, boy, I've accepted invites from India, Bulgaria, Finland. I go all over England, Ireland, Wales, Australia. I love it. I love travel.
I envy you. I would love to see more of the world. I've never been out of the country.
No kidding. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, not even Mexico or Canada. And I've always wanted to go to England. I've been a huge Lewis Carroll fan all my life. My first published novel was the third Alice book of the trilogy, and I've always just wanted to go to Oxford and stomp around.
Yeah, Oxford has that great pub that I went to. I want to say it's called the Eagle, but it's where Tolkien wrote side by side with C.S. Lewis. It was their everyday pub, and so I went and I wrote there just to see what it felt like. But it was super cool. Yeah, I know Eagle's in the title, but I can't remember the full name of the pub.
If you like Tolkien and Lewis, James A. Owen has a 7-volume series called The Imaginarium Geographica. Are you familiar with it?
What's it called? The Imaginary what?
The Imaginarium Geographica, and they're tones,
that's cool.
by the way. But
I'd never heard of it. I'll have to look that up. That's cool.
The conceit of it is that the first book is that Jack and James and Charles, Jack, John, and Charles are all called on by Bert to take over the maps of all of the archipelago of dreams, a place that doesn't exist. And they're like, what are you talking about?
Cool.
And they're drawn into this world of dwarves and talking beavers and centaurs. And then at the end of the book, they sign the contract that they'll do this. And it's John R.R. Tolkien and Jack Clive Staples Lewis. And I forget who the other ones.
That's cool. I like that.
And they became characters in the rest of the books.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
I want to talk a little bit about the concept of cartooning and art, because you talk about you could draw a rat in your sleep, and it's because Rat is a fairly simple character when you look at him. Just a couple of basic shapes, and you're in the right order here. How do you present that initially as a strip and say, hey, look, this is my art, this is I draw, and then you also have to balance that with the fact that it's really very simple to draw it.
Yeah.
And people say, my 3-year-old could draw that or something. Do you know where I'm trying to get? I mean, I'm not trying to run it down because it's.
No, I do. I think that because the strip is very blunt in just especially in the early days, it was a little more in your face than the other comics, direct, acerbic. I sort of thought about me when I started is, I don't know, I sort of like punk rock, and I liked what punk rock did to rock and roll. And those guys could play maybe 3 chords, but it was the attitude maybe or energy that mattered, and it sort of made its own contribution to rock and roll. So I think there's something to be said for that sort of bluntness in any art form. Certain legs. Now that's very common. Cyanide and Happiness and everything else, you see a ton of stick figures. But at the time, it wasn't done that much, not in the 2000s in the American Comics page. So I like that. So anyways, my only point is the simplicity of the characters matches the bluntness of the dialogue. I want it to be a little bit like it looked like it was drawn on the side of a grocery bag. Like there was something about that was appealing. If the Sex Pistols had a synthesizer, it would have ruined it. I wouldn't have changed it. Even if I could draw super well, I wouldn't have shown it. Yeah.
And I think Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics, he talks about how the more abstract the character is, the more the reader can put themselves in the place of that. We're all Charlie Brown when we look at him because he's just a big round head and 2 eyes and a mouth. We can all be that. As soon as you get to Rex Morgan, MD, it's like,
yeah, I got that from those Hemingway short stories about that Nick Adams when he goes camping. You can like taste the food and experience the outdoors. And if someone really asks you, like, where did you get that idea from? It's actually not in the story. Your brain fills in a lot of it because he keeps that so vague. And Peanuts does too. I mean, where are those kids? Nobody knows. Like what is that town?
Where are the
Nobody
parents?
knows the name of the town. Where are their parents? Yeah, nobody knows. Do you know, interesting trivia, mid-1950s, Schultz experimented with a series of 3 or 4 Sunday strips where Charlie Brown and Lucy go to a golf tournament, and all of the crowd, they're all adults, and Sparky hated it. I think he even insisted to not go in any of the reprint books because it blew the world apart. Like it blew apart the conceit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, all you knew about the adults was there was a teacher who never talked in the strips, and Charlie Brown's father was a barber. Which was funny because Charlie Brown had no hair.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's so sad for anybody who lives in St. Paul. Sparky's dad was a barber, and he had a shop in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Sparky lived above it, and their apartment was above it. Schultz lived above it. And recently, I happened to be able to see it about 10 years ago, but recently they tore it all down and they replaced it with like Whole Foods. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's from looking up.
We're back,
it's so sad.
We're back to looking up.
Yeah, because Schultz is, put aside that it's a comic strip for a second, he's one of the great American artists. And I would put Charlie Brown side by side with Holden Caulfield, Huck Finn, all of the great characters. And if there had been a building that Salinger wrote Catcher in the Rye in, it would not have been torn down. So, and the barbershop is so iconic to Peanuts and Charlie Brown. How could they tear that building down? That should have gotten some historic status. Anyways, that's crazy.
It reminds me of when I went to San Antonio. Saw the Alamo and was very disappointed that it was next to a strip mall. But in the hotel I was at, they showed a map of like, hey, places to go see, and I saw that the O. Henry house was down the street, a ways down the street, but down the street. I had no car. I'd taken a taxi to the hotel, so I walked it. And as I walked the direction of the O. Henry house, the neighborhood started to get rougher and a little more seedy looking. I'm like, this is maybe not so cool. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go into this, police station right here. I'm going to ask where the house is at. And if they can't tell me, I'm just going to turn around and say I missed it. So I go across the street and the police station's on a corner. So there's like a door on each side of the corner. I go in the one door and it's like, can you help me find directions to the O. Henry house? Like, whose house? Give direction. Like, no, it's like a landmark. It's like supposed to be a tourist stop of places. Like, sorry, we don't know where it's at. Like, okay, thank you. And I walked out the other door thinking I was getting ready to go home. And across the street, there's this little yellow cabin with a historical marker in front of it. This says the O. Henry house. I'm like, do not call 911 in this town. They don't know where you are, and they will never find you. The house that was across the street, they did not know where it was or what it was.
Yeah, for people who live in Philly, they know they tore Ben Franklin's house down. If you try to see it now, you just see this vague outline built of PVC pipe of what the frame used to look like. If you go to New Orleans, I mean, the guy who the airport is named for, the founder of all jazz, really, Louis Armstrong, his house got torn down. And so they were going to tear down Mount Vernon. And that's when the people started to get involved to save historic structures. But believe it or not, they were going to tear down Mount Vernon. And it was just an era when that stuff got torn down and we lost so much. Yeah.
And that is the crux of looking up.
I didn't even mean to make that connection. That's a great segue. But
it's there.
Yeah.
And the thing about Saint's angst is that she's seeing her town the old things torn down, the cool things torn down, the places that have meant her life, even like a rundown, greasy hamburger place, like the Beefy Bee with
Yeah.
graffiti all over the side. That's her place, and it's being taken over by
Yeah.
hipsters wanting lattes and the money truck that comes in. So get this book. Read
By
this
the
book.
way, I
You'll
don't think
enjoy
I've
this.
said this before. Thank you. That Beefy Bee was inspired. My grandfather, who was Greek, owned a restaurant in what would now have been right in the middle of downtown Phoenix, and it was called the Busy Bee, and it was there throughout the 1950s. I think on the corner of Washington and First. So the Beefy Bee is loosely named for my grandfather's restaurant in Phoenix. I got to remember to say that when I go through Phoenix on the tour. As you asked the
Yes,
question, I'm like, oh yeah, that's where that came from. I forgot about that.
and provide the address in case they can go by and see the structure. Um, did he give
I
out
know
free
right where
fries
the
on your
corner
birthday?
is. Yeah. Oh boy, that would be great, wouldn't it? I forgot about that. Yeah, that came from a place where I was when I was a little kid growing up in Southern California. There was a place called Farrell's. You went there for dessert and for parties, and if you claimed it was your birthday, everything was free. So I cannot tell you the number of times me and my cousins had birthdays in June, July, January, May. Like as long as you got a
You
different
didn't have a
server,
driver's
you
license.
nobody. You're a kid. You don't have a driver's license. It worked like a charm.
I think Denny's still does that, but you have to present ID now. Well, Stefan, we're reaching the top of the hour. Yeah,
Yeah.
birthday
No,
every
these
day.
were
You
in the
just get a
glory
different
days.
server.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know why I'm making this connection now, but it's just a restaurant thing. One of the guys I used to work with, he as a teenager, he worked at Pizza Hut, and he and his buddy, were,
Yeah.
were together there. And the benefit of working at Pizza Hut was that for lunch you got a free 5-inch personal pan pizza. That was your lunch. You could
Wow.
make it, you could eat it. It was
Yeah.
covered 5-inch.
Yeah.
So him and his buddy talked to the manager. It's like, look, we're taking lunch at the same time. Is it okay if we just make a 10-inch? And pi r squared never entered the conversation anywhere. Like,
It's a good try though.
we had a lot more pizza than 5
That's
inches.
funny. You know what you just reminded me of because you mentioned I think Dogman earlier. I did a tour with Dave Pilkey, so I got to know him a little bit. For anybody who knows Dave, you know that his first name is spelled D-A-V. There's no E on the end of Dave. And the true story behind it, he was working, I think it was Shakey's. I know it was a pizza place when he was a teenager, and they misspelled his name on the badge. They dropped the E. I mean, nobody spells Dave D-A-V. They dropped the E, and he kept it. And he's gone on to be this mega successful author with Dave spelled D-A-V, all thanks to Shakey's. Yeah.
Now, somewhere a manager at Shaky should be saying, I remember that kid. Do I still have his badge in a drawer somewhere?
Oh, how much would that little name clip be worth? That's crazy.
That would be funny to have. But Stefan, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything about the book that I haven't touched on? Because I know I've talked around certain things, but
No, I think you got it. I think I know from experience, people are going to be wondering if they come to any of these 19 tour stops, if I will be signing everything. And I do. I sign Pearl's books. I sign Looking Up books. I've been told in some places to go to the signing table, you're supposed to buy a Looking Up book, but I'll make sure to fudge that because I don't really care. As long as they come up to the table and I'll sign whatever they have. As long as they don't bring a grocery bag with 32 books, because I've seen that too. That's too many.
oh, I've told this story before, but
Yeah.
1989 Chicago Comic-Con, I was
Yeah.
standing in line for Peter David, who was doing the
Yeah.
Incredible Hulk at the time. And there was a gentleman in front of me, obviously mentally disabled. He was there with his older father,
Yeah.
and he had a World Trade Center of Incredible Hulk
Oh,
books.
yeah.
And I was like, that's not going to go well. And he got up to the front, and Peter signed the first 5 books, and then moved the stack, and took the next guy. Then he signed the next 5 books, moved the stack, and took the next. And he did that until every one of that kid's books were signed. I was like, that story's living with me till I die.
That's pretty cool. You know what I end up doing? I can't draw a character in every one when they do that, but I'll have them open them, and I can very quickly sign each of them. It's the drawing of the characters that takes so much time. And
Sure.
sometimes you do some of these signings and the crowds can be, decently large, and you do have to keep the line moving because the bookstore does close at 11 or whatever. 10. So, yeah.
I've done signings for my own books, but I've not had that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. The bookstore
Usually it's
does.
like, we're doing a signing over here. You want to come get a book signed?
It's funny. In most cases, you'd think the bookstore would be like, yeah, we're just selling tons of books. But really, when it hits 10 o'clock, they just want to go home.
Yeah.
They don't think the extra sales are worth that much. Like, just please hurry. I gotta leave. So yeah.
I'm supposed to be home watching Matlock now.
Yeah.
All right. Stephan, again, thank you so much for coming on. I do appreciate you being here.
My
folks in
pleasure.
the
Thanks
chat,
for reading the book.
appreciate all the people who came to watch us live tonight. If you're watching on the replay, the link will still be below there for Looking Up by Stephan Pastis. And go ahead and read on further past those links, because you'll find all the books that Critical Blast publishes, including The Monsters Next Door, which just came out in that last month. If you are a writer, we are opening the anthology next month for the third and final volume of The Devil You Know Best. We did The Devil You Know Better, and now it's The Devil You Know Best. If you've got a horror, science fiction, fantasy story where somebody meets the devil and something happens, we want to see it. So bring it on. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for being here. We do appreciate you. We don't have a show without you guys. We're just a podcast falling in the woods otherwise. So we're glad you're here. And as always, while you were here, we just hope you had a blast. Good night, everyone.